Hi there, welcome back to 19 Considerations. Today I wanted to continue in the vein that we've been following for the previous two videos, which is looking at the role of medicine and the structure of medicine within our culture. So we first of all looked at it from an archetypal point of view with the goddess Asclepius and his daughters Panacea and Hygeia. And then we took a brief look at some of the, let's say, pertinent history from my standpoint as a therapist, particularly focusing on the Flexner Report of 1910 in the US, which charted the course very much for where medicine is today. And medicine is embedded in the broader culture and is inseparable from that. Looking into this and thinking about this, I decided to pick up again a book written by Charles Eisenstein called The Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. That's the book there. So this was written in 2013 and I read it when it first came into print, and I have to say I haven't picked it up since, though I've followed very loosely Charles's sort of work, and I still find him a very, an inspirational person, a very intelligent thinker, very broad-minded. He has a good broad viewpoint across genres, and I think that concept in and of itself is very, very valuable, because we live in a world of hyper-compartmentalization. This is as true of medicine as it is in any other part of society, where there are specialties and subspecialties, and these are all compartmentalized, separated from each other, and there is very little oversight. So when I describe it to people, or when I have described it to people in the past, we have this idea of zooming in to something, say, a problem or a need or a necessity or an area, a specialty, but we can't lose that ability to zoom back out. Medicine particularly has lost its contextualization, has lost its sense of context, with this increasing dive deeper and deeper into specialization. And interestingly, I think this really stems from an economic model, which is the model and the work of Adam Smith, with his concept of division of labour and increased efficiency therein. And is it appropriate to apply an economic manufacturing model to all human endeavours, including medicine? Once you do that, and this is done, then there is an ultimate price tag on a human life. And how does that get ascertained? And how do you build a system based upon that model? I don't necessarily think it's the best model. I don't have any great suggestions for another one, but at this point. But yeah, I would question that as the validity of that model. And I think we see that, increasingly today with bigger and bigger, hospitals and more money and increasing specialization. But let alone the person as a whole is not considered, let alone their psycho-social, cultural, historical context. It's very much that gallbladder, that retina, so on and so forth. And treatment then proceeds along the lines of, I'm looking at that gallbladder, we need a corticosteroid for this. And there is no zoom back out and say, okay, what is the bigger picture? And within that bigger picture, what are the nodal points that we can actually tweak and affect for the benefit of the client? So when you are practicing the form of medicine that I do, so my background training, qualified as an osteopath, trained in acupuncture, and then I spent the rest of the last sort of 12, 15 years developing skills very much within a context of what's called physiological regulating medicine. The idea that you're working the psychological, neurological, endocrine and immune systems as a coherent whole that is intercommunicating within the person, and then that person is embedded within its social and with his or her social and cultural milieu. So what we aim to do is find these nodal points where we can create change here, 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 and here, and triangulate at least a problem, which helps. And what I've found over the years is that making small changes summates to a greater change. And I think this way of looking at health and healthcare and medicine well-being, I believe is the way that it always should have been looked at and was in the past. And I think this foray into this hyper compartmentalized, specialized medical model has really brought us to this point with a chronically ill, vertically ill, overly medicated population who are then very, very prone to a coronavirus or a flu virus or some other pathogen. And the health services in the West, but in the world really, but very much in the West, have concentrated on this management of the sick. Maybe it's a misnomer to call them health services. Maybe they should be called disease services or ill health services. But it's been the management of symptoms, the maintenance of current lifestyle and behaviour without real serious looking towards change. And whole health services and budgets have been spent on that. And then you get a black swan event like this, which derails not only the healthcare systems, but now, because of the reaction with the government's need to protect its inappropriate healthcare measures, you now essentially have pushed the world into arguably the greatest depression since the 1930s, and we'll see how that all transpires. But at the moment, it doesn't look good, and time will tell whether that's been an appropriate decision on behalf of the politicians and health services of the world. This is not to argue that life is cheap or a certain proportion of the population is somehow expendable or so on and so forth. It really, for me, just highlights the fact that without investment in the only thing that you have, which is your physiology, your physiological regulation, and your immune system, and the interconnections between those and the pathways in between those with the signaling molecules and the hormones and so on and so forth. Without that functioning well, you really have nothing. You've got at very least a veneer of health which is being kept in place with medication. Anyway, that's a rather long preamble and to reading. I'm just going to read the first couple of pieces out of the first sort of chapter of this book, just a few paragraphs. So Charles Einstein starts, "Sometimes I feel nostalgic for the cultural mythology of my youth, a world in which there was nothing wrong with soda pop, in which the Super Bowl was important, in which America was bringing democracy to the world, in which the doctor could fix you, in which science was going to make life better and better, and they just put a man on the moon. Sure, there were problems, but the scientists and experts were working hard to fix them. Soon a new medical advance, a new law, a new educational technique would propel the onward improvement of life. My childhood perceptions were part of a narrative I call the story of the people, in which humanity was destined to create a perfect world through science, reason, technology, to conquer nature, transcend our animal origins, and engineer a rational society. Nonetheless, I, like many others, felt a wrongness in the world, a wrongness that seeped through the cracks of my privileged, insulated childhood. I never fully accepted what I'd been offered as normal. Life, I knew, was supposed to be more joyful than this, more real, more meaningful, and the world was supposed to be more beautiful. We were not supposed to hate Mondays and live for weekends and holidays. We were not supposed to have to raise our hands to be allowed to pee. We were not supposed to be kept indoors on a beautiful day after day after day. As my horizons broadened, I knew that millions were not supposed to be starving, that nuclear weapons were not supposed to be hanging over our heads, that rainforests were not supposed to be shrinking, or the fish dying, or the condors and the eagles disappearing. I could not accept the way the dominant narrative of my culture handled these things, as fragmentary problems to be solved as unfortunate facts of life to be regretted, or as unmentionable taboo subjects to be simply ignored. On some level we all know better. This knowledge seldom finds clear articulation, so instead we express it indirectly through covert and overt rebellion. Addiction, self-sabotage, procrastination, laziness, rage, chronic fatigue and depression are all ways that we withhold our full participation in the programme of life we are offered. When the conscious mind cannot find a reason to say no, the unconscious says no in its own way. More and more of us cannot bear to stay in the old normal any longer. So that's just a couple of paragraphs really from this book, Charles Eisenstein's The Beautiful World, Our Hearts Know As Possible, because I think with any conversation, consideration, thought pattern, it's very easy to point to the negative, and it's not my intention to overly do that. It's my intention to describe the situation as I see it, in broad brushstroke terms, an idea maybe of how we got here, and then the next important step, which I touched on a little bit today, with the idea of this sort of physiological regulating medicine, this biopsychosocial model. We need to look to build not so much a better health system, but through our health and well-being practice, build a more robust society, culture, humanity. Because changing one aspect of this, as I mentioned earlier, and hopefully we can all see, isn't enough. The sort of the matrix of interconnected economics, medicine, politics will have to shift. And this is, in some ways, is happening at the moment, though not in a controlled manner. So far better to elegantly and safely deconstruct than to just collapse, free fall into the building's own footprint. Have we missed the opportunity to deconstruct? Possibly. Hopefully, from this point forward, there can be a concerted effort to begin a reconstruction process, hopefully not in vain.